Big news for anyone who loves the history of D-Day. Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours has just launched a brand new tour that visits the D-Day beaches and lots of other sites in rural France, and all from the comfort of a luxurious cruise on the Seine River. Now, we ran this tour in 2024 and it was a huge success. It sold out in a matter of weeks. So now we've rolled it out again for 2025. But this time, there'll be 3 departures in June, July and September, giving you 3 times the opportunity to join us. The cruise is on board the luxurious Amadeus Diamond and begins and ends in Paris. Over 8 days, you'll enjoy the history, scenery and culture of the beautiful Seine River. But as an exclusive offering just for our passengers, you'll enjoy 2 full days touring the D-Day landing beaches in both the US and British sectors, plus daily seminars on board the ship that unpack the history of D-Day. And like all our tours, you'll be hosted by one of our expert historians who'll bring the story of D-Day to life. And if you've been on one of our tours before, you'll know that our historians really are the best there is. This is an exclusive cruise and places are extremely limited. Visit battlefields.com.au to book your place today.
Hey, it's Mark Marin from WTF here to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. And I'm sure the reason you're listening to this podcast right now is because you chose it. Well, choose Progressive's Name Your Price tool, and you could find insurance options that fit your budget, so you can pick the best one for your situation. Who doesn't like choice? Try it at Progressive.com. And now, some legal info. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
When it comes to weight loss, no 2 people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't out-train her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
A Living History production.
I'm Matt McLachlan.
And I'm Pete Smith.
We're battlefield historians who love nothing better than getting out and walking the ground where great battles in history took place.
And now we'd like you to come with us. Every week, BattleWalks will take you to one of the great battlefields of Europe.
As we walk the ground, we'll dig through the pages of history. We'll uncover the secrets of the battlefields, and most importantly, we'll tell the stories of the people who fought and died there.
Welcome to BattleWalks.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of BattleWalks. Thank you once again for joining us. And don't forget, if you want to support the show and listen without ads, you can do so by buying us a coffee. And I'll put a link in the show notes to show you how you can do that. But even just by listening, you are supporting the program. And so we appreciate it. So tell your friends, add a review. That's always helpful as well. If you can add a review and a star rating, we really appreciate it. And it helps more people find the program. Today, we are back walking the World War II battlefields. We've received a fantastic response to the previous episodes we've done in the New Guinea region. And now we're going to really round out the trio. We've done Kokoda over several episodes. We've done Milne Bay. And now we're going to do the beachheads on the north coast of New Guinea. So just a fascinating chapter of World War II history, particularly in 1942, stretching into 1943. And joining me to help us on this battle walk is my current co-host, as Pete Smith is still tied up on the battlefields. It's David Howell. Dave, thanks for joining us once again on Battle Walks.
Great to be back, Matt.
Mate, over the years, we've been talking over the recent years about, obviously, the impact that COVID has had on the battlefield touring industry. We're back now. You are back leading tours of Kokoda. We're doing tours to the Western Front and Gallipoli and all over the world. But it's still been quite a treat, mate, to walk the battlefields in this virtual sense via this podcast. How have you found the experience?
I found it different in the sense that it gives me an opportunity to reflect. When you're up there and you're taking people around, whether it be Kokoda or Milne Bay or what we're going to talk about today with the beachheads, you're very much caught up in the moment. And as a guide or a trek leader, you don't always have the I guess the ability in that moment to think, oh, okay, this is what it would be like if you were somebody that hadn't done it before. And I think it's been a good experience for me trying to put myself in the shoes of a person wanting to take a pilgrimage to a battlefield, not being there before, and to see what you could tell them and describe to them before they go there, so they get a bit of an idea of what they are to expect.
Well, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't listened to our previous ones, please go back and do that, because it's been quite an experience. And David, it took us 3 episodes, I think, to get across the Kokoda track. We managed to do Milne Bay in one. We're going to cover the northern beachheads in a single episode as well. And that really does round out particularly the Australian story of the key parts of the New Guinea battlefield. I know there are many more. I'm not trying to say this covers the entire multi-year New Guinea campaign, but it does give us a very good overview of what the Australians went through, particularly in those opening years of the fighting in New Guinea, doesn't it?
It does. And really, 1942, 80 years for all of these battles that we're talking about. It's their 80th anniversary, of course, and the 5 key battles fought in what was then Australian territory in Papua. As you said, we've really well and truly gone over the Kokoda track. We've covered Milne Bay, and we're covering now those 3 key battles at the end of the Kokoda campaign, which is Gona, Buna and Sanananda.
Well, give us an overview of the historic background to the ground we're going to be walking in this key area.
So, in essence, these 3 places, Gona, Buna and Sanananda, are located around about 90 to 100 kilometres north of Kokoda, and they are on the north coast of Papua. So if you're looking at the map, imagine right at the top of Papua itself, heading out to the Solomon Sea. And this is the place where the Japanese, of course, from our earlier podcast, it's where they landed when they did their overland tack towards Port Moresby over the Kokoda track. But it's also the place where the battles finish. So it starts there for the Japanese, but of course, after the campaigns in the Owen Stanleys, it's where the Australians and with the help of the Americans drive the Japanese out of Papua.
So tell us about some of the fighting that took place in those beachhead campaigns after the tough work on the Kokoda track was already done.
Yeah, so a lot of people may not be aware, but actually the amount of casualties that the Australians received, and the Japanese for that matter, most of it happens in these low areas north of Kokoda. So finishing off from where we left with the Kokoda campaign, the Australians arrive into Kokoda on the 2nd of November. They have no resistance. On the 3rd of November, they hoist the Australian flag, and that signifies the retaking of Kokoda. But the fighting was only really just getting underway for these final parts of the Kokoda campaign, or the extension of the Kokoda campaign, if you will. So basically, the Australian that arrived at Kokoda could open up the airfield, but immediately north of Kokoda, very close to Kokoda, you had places in particular, Oivi, Garari. And so by around the 12th of November, you are getting Japanese creating this blocking action. A lot of Australians on their way through, some for the very first time, including the 25th Brigade, which is meeting this Japanese resistance, who really were creating a blocking force, if you will, to slow their enemy, us, of course, advancing to where they have their beachheads. And I might add that the best way for a listener to get a picture in their head, you imagine we've got a coastline on the northern tip of Papua, and the Japanese have built defensive positions, and they're not facing out to sea, rather they're facing back towards where we're going to. Well, when I say we're the Allies, and the Australians are going to advance towards them.
And we shouldn't forget the role of the Americans in all of this, David, because throughout the New Guinea campaign, the fighting was also carrying on at Guadalcanal. And I've spoken to a lot of veterans from both of those campaigns, and there was always a big sort of argument back in the US about who had it tougher, because even though the beachhead campaigns weren't as well known as the Guadalcanal campaign, a lot of men who fought in sort of Buna-Gona, Sanananda, that area, talked about they had it tougher than what the guys were going through on Guadalcanal. So pretty tough fighting for the Americans, not just the Australians.
Indeed, and in particular, we talk about in the campaign about the AIF and the militia, but it's important to note that the American soldiers that were coming to that would fight, in particular at Buna and nearby at Cape Endahare, these guys from the 128th Regiment, these were, I guess, what they call national servicemen, so their version of militia. In fact, their battalion or their regimental history, Montana Mud, these guys had come out to Australia, and in fact, they were in Victoria before they go up to the northern beachheads, and they're training at Seymour up near Puckapunyal, up near where the army base is today, and they're training on rocky, dry, sparsely wooded Australian bush, which of course in Victoria is nothing like what they're about to come up against in the swamplands of the northern beachheads of Papua.
David, this campaign really should be better known, shouldn't it? Both in Australia and also in America. And I saw a high-ranking US military man speaking recently where he was talking about the long links of service that go back to the First World War between America and Australia, and he was making the point that it's more important today than it's ever been. Obviously, the battles, the beachhead battles, define that better than just about anything else, and yet they've really slipped through the cracks of history, haven't they? Is this a battle that you think we should know more about?
Definitely. I think it was fair to say that Kokoda obviously took the because of the nature, I guess, of the Owen Stanleys and the track and all those things that come with it, sort of rose to the surface, and Milne Bay was kind of left to the side. It started to come into its own now, with lots of books being written on, a lot of attention given to it. But the Beachheads campaign have almost been a little bit of an afterthought to a certain degree, especially in recent times. We've seen a lot of books written about Kokoda, but the northern beachheads, it's important to put in perspective, just from a casualty point of view from Australia, you're talking 3 times the casualties inflicted upon Australians. And, it's roughly 600 Australians died in the Owen Stanleys on the Kokoda campaign. But with the northern beachheads, you're looking at, 1,400 odd Australians that lost their lives fighting at these last positions where the Japanese were had their holdout, and we have many more Australians who have family and relatives that are connected to it. And I should add that as time marches on and we're 80 years past the battles, some of the men that fought there, and I'm thinking now of the New South Wales Battalion of the 55th, 53rd, these guys were a little bit younger than, say, the AIF guys, and we are still, there's only a handful of them left, but they're the guys who are still surviving today, and that was their battle, not so much up in the mountains, but down on the beaches. And it would be great if, especially now being the 80th anniversary, that more attention gets put on these Northern Beachheads campaigns.
I certainly agree with that, and the nature of the fighting. Not to take anything away from Kokoda, obviously, but the nature of the fighting on the beachheads, advancing against entrenched positions, coming under machine gun fire, and the Japanese, we should state this, knew that this was their last roll of the dice. They'd seen their comrades fighting in the Kokoda track. They'd seen them pull back. They had been ordered to hold the beachheads at all cost. This was desperate fighting from the Japanese. And as we know, when you cornered the Japanese in the Pacific, the fighting was absolutely brutal.
Indeed. And it's also important to note where it relates, and I make mention of this with Kokoda, when the Japanese withdrew down to their beachhead, they had not only thought that they could regroup. Obviously, Guadalcanal that you spoke about took away a lot of resources because all the Japanese that were soldiers that were fighting on Guadalcanal and in Papua were coming from Rabaul, which had been taken earlier in 1942 by the Japanese. That was their base. But it's important to note that the Japanese did get reinforcements. So prior and during the Beachhead campaign, 2 important things happen which aren't going to sit well for the Allies. And one is that that we had started to, and when I say we, the Allies had started to put an air bridge, if you will, from Port Moresby and with a fighter umbrella, so the air bridge bringing in supplies. So after they have a few contacts just immediately north of Kokoda, the Japanese have withdrawn back and they're dug in on the beachheads. And I'll talk about that in a moment about their defensive positions. But we create an air bridge. We open up an airfield, in between Kokoda and the northern beachheads, if you will. And we sort of controlled that. But the Americans, for example, had brought in were attempting to bring around some heavy supplies. So big weapon like artillery, all the stuff that they need to wage war. And it was actually sunk by Japanese aircraft that had come from Lae and Salamaua, which was further up the coastline in what is known as New Guinea. So that happens. But also the Japanese get some 2,000 reinforcements coming down. So yes, they're making their stand, but they do have some fresh troops. So it's going to make it very difficult for the Allies to shift them from the north coast of Papua.
It's just a fascinating chapter. When it comes to visiting it today, David, is it an area that's easy to get to?
It is much easier than, say, going to some of the places on Kokoda. So, for example, the big ticket places in Kokoda is places like Brigade Hill and, of course, Isarava, where the memorial with the 4 granite pillars are, and they are really only accessible by walking or, if you're lucky, flying in by helicopter. So it is more accessible. Today, there is the main centre, if you will, in the Oro province, where all of those places I just mentioned are. Is Popondetta, and Popondetta has an internationally rated tarmac now, and you can just get regular domestic services out to Popondetta Airport, which is actually called Girawa. And as a note, Girawa is where the Japanese had established their supply line, if you will, where they ran the Kokoda campaign. It's also the area where the Allies had opened up airfields just prior to this very campaign that we're talking about. So it is one of the more accessible places, actually, but of course it doesn't have the same attention as Kokoda. So one, you don't have enough interest in it for it to have really taken off like Kokoda, but secondly of all, it's something that you can get to. It is very easy to get to, relatively speaking, for other places in PNG.
How long would it take to tour the beachheads?
To do it justice, you'd want at least a couple of days. You could easily do it in 2 to 3 days. It's only half an hour flying time from Port Moresby. And in fact, when you land at Popondetta, although the airstrip has been upgraded, it's a proper tarmac, unlike Kokoda, where it's still, although Kokoda's been wide, it's still a grass airstrip. But, it's only 30 minutes away. And when you fly in, you can still see these horseshoe, which were the dugouts, if you will, where they could give some protection for the Allies, some protection for their planes and fuel and things like that. So you can still see the remnants of war. Immediately when you land, there is a hotel or a motel, for want of a better term, in Popondetta itself, in supermarkets. And, you can base yourself there and you can access Gona, Buna and Sanananda either by road or the way that I like to go is by going down to one of the points and using a boat to get around to those 3 main points.
Well, let's do our battle walk. I mean, it's not so much of a walk as a tour, but it's a fascinating area. So give us a rundown on a tour that we're going to take as we tour the beachheads on the north coast of New Guinea.
So the way I normally do it, and as I said just a moment ago, I really like going by boat, just because you get to see the coastline and you get to put things in greater perspective. So I normally start at Gona. So to give you an idea, we would arrive usually from Kokoda, because people who have come out to do the touring, that not walking, they would have driven down, they've flown into Popondetta, driven down, had a look at Kokoda, driven back and had a look at all those places like Oivi-Garari, the Kamusi River, etc. And then I usually take people and we start at Gona itself. Now, Gona is a beach. It's, imagine a dark volcanic sand. There is really only 2 official monuments that are left out on the battlefield. One is at Gona and one is at Buna, which we'll get to later. On the way through Popondetta, though, I should mention there is a lovely memorial there, lovely war memorial there, and it has all the original plaques, these big bronze plaques that used to sit out on those battlefields. At some time in not in the last 30, 40 years, they were brought in and they've made a nice memorial park and they've brought those plaques in. So, we always have a look at that. And we drive on a bumpy road, but if people are getting to Gona, you've probably already done the bumpy road to and from Kokoda, and it's a dirt road that takes you out of Popondetta town. And you're looking left and right of this dirt bumpy road with a lot of plantations, which are palm oil. And you eventually head down to the wonderful Gona Beach with it's got a creek, which is mentioned in just about any history of Gona, which featured in the campaign. And you've got as I said, this wonderful volcanic soil, but you're looking out into the magnificent Solomon Sea. So try and picture in your mind, palm trees on the beach, coconut palms, the water lapping up against this black volcanic sand. It actually reminds me of that scene in the World War II American film on Guadalcanal. And now I've had a mental blank. Thin Red Line. You can imagine that that's the sort of scene that you would come across when you arrived at Gona.
I've never done this area of the Pacific, of New Guinea. I haven't actually visited the beachheads, and I'm looking forward to doing that with you, David, when we do our big New Guinea trip. When I've done battlefields like Guadalcanal, other parts of New Guinea and other parts of the Solomon Islands, there's not much left from the war, but you can imagine it when you're there. You can stand on a beach and imagine what happened as the Allies came in and the Japanese defended, and you can head to places like the Tenerau on Guadalcanal and imagine what it was like as the Japanese tried to cross that river. Is it like that on the beachheads? Can you picture in your mind's eye what it was like, the fighting there?
Oh, you definitely. Look, you're right. There isn't a huge lot of detritus left there. A lot of it's either changed because the environment's changed over time with the sand, shifting sands, etc., or it's been removed. You do see a plane, a B-25 at Popondetta when you go through, but there isn't a lot of that type of stuff left over. But you can certainly picture in your mind, because it is unchanged. There is the palm oil, as I said, but when you get down on the beach itself, other than a little ramp there that the vehicles drive up, you will be able to imagine as it was 80 years ago. Same sand, same trees. In fact, there's some big trees just as you hit the beach that I'm sure were there during the campaign. And it, again, is relatively untouched.
What was the fighting like in this area, David?
The fighting there was really, really bad in the sense that you've got Japanese, who you mentioned before, Matt, who know that it's their last stand. They're dug in, and they've made, all along the beachheads, they basically built these pillboxes that were... think in your mind, these defensive positions. Usually we think about, say, Normandy, or you think about these big concrete bunkers, and some are, mainly almost subterranean in a sense. But the Japanese had months to, build up their defenses there. And what they did is that they lopped down coconut palms. They used corrugated iron, and they had 44-gallon drums, fuel drums, and they'd fill those with sand. They'd interlock them with the with the coconut palms and put a corrugated iron roof on it. And of course, whilst the fighting was going up in the Owen Stanleys, they were unmolested basically down on the beachheads. And of course, it doesn't take long for the jungle to grow over the top of these pillboxes. And of course, they had their slits at the front that they could look out with their machine guns and their rifles, etc. The other thing to note is they didn't just build one, they built them in a diamond formation. So they each were able to give mutual fire to the other bunker. So they were very, very difficult to attack. So if you attacked one, there was another bunker that could focus its attention. And the men came up with a terribly tough time, especially the Australians at Gona when they first went down there. A lot of them had not had time to do reconnaissance, so they didn't have much of an intelligence picture of where the Japanese were. For example, Gona, which was the first of the three positions, the Japanese positions on the beachheads to fall, was set about by the 39th Battalion. We'd mentioned those in the Kokoda podcast. The 39th Battalion had been relieved just prior to Brigade Hill. They'd been re-equipped. They came back they had some reinforcements with them, and they went back into to fight at the northern beachheads relatively soon after that Kokoda and those other areas were opened up. And as I said, they had little time to get intelligence. They also had the 21st Brigade with them. These are the guys who Bruce Kingsbury, that got the VC at Isarava, had belonged to. Again, they all came over. They flew back. They'd been in Moresby at this stage after they'd been relieved after Brigade Hill. They flew back over and they reformed the 30th Brigade, which had now the 39th and the 49th from Queensland, but they'd also had now the 53rd Militia Battalion. These are the guys who had been up on the at Isarava on the right flank. They were probably the most untrained Australian soldiers we had up there, and they've amalgamated with the 55th, who had done some garrison duty at Milne Bay but not been involved with the battle. So you had some men certainly in their ranks that had fought the Japanese already, but you had a lot of men who were going in to battle for the first time, and they were going up against, as we said, a well-determined enemy, was dug in, had plenty of time to build their defences, and of course the Australians didn't have really the intelligence to know where they were.
A little self-care can go a long way, especially amidst the hustle and bustle of the holidays. That's where Vegamore comes in. Trusted by millions, Vegamore is all about giving your hair the love and care it deserves. With their vegan and cruelty-free formulas, you can nourish and revitalize your strands while indulging in some much-needed pampering. Because let's face it, who couldn't use a bit more me time this time of year? Go to vegamore.com/ACAST, code ACAST. That's vegamour.com/ACAST, code ACAST.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
When it comes to weight loss, no two people are the same. That's why Noom builds personalized plans based on your unique psychology and biology. Take Brittany. After years of unsustainable diets, Noom helped her lose 20 pounds and keep it off.
I was definitely in a yo-yo cycle for years of just losing weight, gaining weight, and it was exhausting.
And Stephanie. She's a former D1 athlete who knew she couldn't out-train her diet, and she lost 38 pounds.
My relationship to food before Noom was never consistent.
And Evan, he can't stand salads, but he still lost 50 pounds with Noom.
I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. Even through the pickiness, Noom taught me that building better habits builds a healthier lifestyle. I'm not doing this to get to a number. I'm doing this to feel better.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom users compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Raise your hand if you want your nails to look perfect all the time. Me too. I'm Sarah Gibson-Tuttle from Olive & June, and this is exactly why we created the Mani System. We wanted to make it possible for everyone everywhere to give themselves a beautiful manicure at home. With our tools and our long-lasting polish, each manicure with our Mani System comes out to just $2. That's right, $2. No more $30, $40, $50 manis that you get at a salon and they take hours. Now you can paint your nails on your time and love them more than ever. And by the way, when people ask, who did your nails, where did you get them done? You're going to proudly say, I did them myself. Get 20% off your first Mani System with code PERFECTMANI20 at oliveandjune.com/PERFECTMANI20. That's code PERFECTMANI20 for 20% off at oliveandjune.com/PERFECTMANI20.
What are we going to see in this area at Gona as we tour the ground?
Well, at Gona, as I said, don't expect to see anything that will. You have to use your imagination, but there is the Gona Creek, which features in the history. In fact, a good friend of mine who's since passed away, Alan Kangamore, he until recently was the last officer left of the 39th Battalion, and Kanga was actually one of those guys who had been held back in Moresby, so he didn't fight on. He hadn't seen any fighting in the war prior to going to New Guinea, but he didn't fight in the Owen Stanley campaign. He was one of the guys. They kept some of them back in reserve to keep the battalion going and to reorganise as reinforcements would come up. And his first battle was actually at Gona. And that creek that I mentioned, one of the stories that he told me was that they came across a line of Japanese coming down on one side of the creek and they were on the other. And they didn't realise that they'd run into each other, both groups, and they both looked at each other, pointed their weapons at each other, were stunned, and they both slowly crept back into the jungle. There's another story where a wild pig ran across near to that creek too, and they opened up fire. But obviously, it wasn't the enemy. So you have to think that although there are structures there to see, the ground is relatively untouched. Some of those features, like the creek line, is still there. The Solomon Sea lapping on the organic, soft black organic volcanic, I should say, sand is as you would have seen it. And of course, the tree lines are very similar, the bush that you would see. So we've got different scrub going on. It's very different than if you went up into the mountains. You're going to have a lot of kunai grass. You've got swampy areas. It's wet underfoot. During the Northern Beachheads campaign, there'd been we were coming towards the end. So we're talking November into December and even into January when it finally finished. So you've got wet season coming on. So it became a quagmire in places. And of course, the ever-present malaria and scrub typhus. So all these things that I'm trying to conjure up an image when we walk across the ground and we have the map and we do map to ground and we show you where these places were. Again, you have to use your imagination. But the good thing is that you have this third character which is still there, and that is the terrain and the bush, and it's relatively what the soldiers would have seen 80 years ago.
If it's opened up and less mountainous country around there, David, what about tanks? Were they employed in great numbers during the beachhead campaigns?
They were, but they were further up along so we're at Gona at the moment. They come into play, the M3 Stuart tanks, which were commanded by Australians. They also had Bren gun carriers, so the small weapons carriers, open top tracked vehicles. They were brought out to play. In fact, when you go to visit the beachheads, prior to going out there or after, you can go to the National Museum in Moresby and you can see one of the tanks that was captured was taken out by the Japanese and is now resting in Port Moresby. You can see what they looked like. They weren't relatively big; they were quite small. The unfortunate thing is, as I said before, you get wet season. You have at the time the battles were going on, and the tanks didn't. They were. I guess they were good to a sense to go up against the Japanese pillboxes, but the issue was that the ground wasn't really suitable for tanks. We're looking at soft, swampy ground, and you can imagine what that would do to a tank. It got bogged, and most of those pillboxes had to be taken by infantrymen charging them. In fact, I interviewed a couple of veterans of the 55th, 53rd, and there's talk of them, attacking and taking one pillboxes, and they would throw grenades in there. In fact, they also had makeshift, which could be weapons to be able to open these bunkers up, if you will. And some of them were a can of fuel that they could get the fuel inside the bunker and get the Japanese out. And I might add that when some of the detritus that you do find, so some of the small things like you can find bits of Owen gun, butts come to mind, the skeleton butt of an Owen gun or the breech of a Tommy gun. There's M1 Garans that you can find. The American helmets, for some reason, up at Buna, the Australians seem to rust away pretty quick, but the Japanese and the American helmets seem to stay. And there's heaps of American helmets up there. That instantly everyone knows what the shape of a World War II American helmet is. But the thing I was going to mention on that is you do find gas masks. That's another thing that people aren't expecting. Why did they have gas masks? And the gas masks that you're finding are Japanese gas masks. It wasn't because gas was employed, but you could imagine the hot, sweltering humidity of those swamps where there were dead, decaying bodies laying around in these stagnant, swampy areas was just disgusting. And then when you read the Japanese accounts, a lot of Japanese actually, because the gas mask was part of their kit, whilst they weren't using it, as I said, because gas wasn't used there, but they did use it because the smell was horrendous. And imagine being one of those Japanese soldiers inside this, inside a pillbox or a bunker, just waiting for the enemy to come, and you're in there days on end. Got corrugated iron on the roof. Imagine you would have been cooking in there, and the smell and the decay just would have been disgusting.
Just horrific, isn't it? So we've seen Gona. Where are we heading next on our boat tour?
Yeah, so at Gona, I hop in it's really interesting when you get there. You see all the you see these they call them banana boats. Basically, they're like they've got 40 horsepower engines on them, and they're quite like a fiberglass open top long fiber glass boat. And you'll see a lot of them lined up already because people use them to trade, to take goods up to Lays way off into the distance. but they go out to sea in these things. They also fish and do things like that. But when we're there, we commandeer them. Get engaged with local people and we hop in these boats. And basically from Gona, we go out. There's a big coral reef there, so we go out on the in the boat just to get away from the reef, and then you're looking back at the shoreline. And this, to me, is just one. It's a beautiful activity to do, and it's a good rest after you've had a bumpy ride from Popondetta to Gona. But you can look back along the coastline. You can see the coconut palms. You can see the village huts that are still there because people still occupy these areas. There's still plenty of people living along the coastline. And in fact, we stay in one of the villages, and I always make a side tour. You can go down to what they call Hattie's Village, which is, if you imagine if you're at Gona Beach looking out to sea, it's down to the left. It probably takes 20-odd minutes down the boat. Hattie's Village, named after an Australian soldier that died there, Lieutenant Alan Hattie. But when you get there, you can still see depressions in the ground that are made, or you see craters, not huge craters like the Western Front, but nonetheless, there are sizable ones that you can walk down into or stand into up to your waist, which were obviously from aerial bombardment that the Allies did. Because, towards the end there, after the Japanese had some activity with their aircraft, we had this fighter umbrella up there, and we did control the skies. And we can, the Japanese got some supplies, not many, but they'd have to come at night so they could avoid getting shot up by Allied aircraft, which were coming out of Port Moresby. And now we'd started to open up airfields north, as I said. But on our trip, we go down there. There is a plane. You can go for a little bit of a walk, and you can go and see an American bomber that's down. It didn't get shot down. It had engine trouble, and I think they recovered the engine. But the plane is there, and it's quite amazing to climb around that. So it's certainly, that's the one big ticket item, but it is hidden in the bush. But as I said, as you walk around Hattie's Village, you'll see some depressions, and you'll see villages which of course have been rebuilt recently, but they are built out of the same materials as what Australian and American soldiers would have seen during the campaign. So after we do that, we get back on the boat, and as I said, we're out just a little bit off you can still see the coast. You're not going out into the ocean, but you just get away from this coral reef that sort of hugs the coastline, and we start heading up to my favourite spot of the northern beachheads for a few reasons. And we get to Sanananda, and usually what happens is in the boat as you're jumping over the water. It's fun. It's a fun activity. You're jumping over the waves in the boat. And you get into Sanananda, and usually greeted by, you start to see the flagpoles of PNG flag and the Australian flag and the Oro Province provincial flag there. And we come in, and you're usually greeted by a traditional dancing group of the Evergay people, which are the cultural group from Sanananda. And you have this wonderful warm welcome. Again, shoreline looks very similar, the dark volcanic sand. And that's where we arrive. And when I visit the northern beachheads, that's where I stay. I stay in the village of Sanananda Point, which, as a side note, is actually not the original coastline. The original coastline is behind it. In 1951, I think it was, Mount Lamington erupted, and Sanananda was affected by that, and it's actually got this extra piece of land, which is a good thing, because we'll get to that in a moment, because the original shoreline has been protected, and it's behind the village that I stay at in Sanananda. But as I said, when you arrive, you get this wonderful welcome by the people at Sanananda. It's just I can picture it in my head now. You come on this bumpy road, you get on the boat, you've got the spray of the sea, and you come in to be this wonderful. You have to experience to get the welcome. It's amazing.
So tell us about the sites from the Second World War we're going to see in Sanananda.
So in Sanananda, which is the last, by the way, Gona was the first to fall to the Allies, and then Sanananda, Buna happens, but Sanananda is the last to fall in January of 1943. But it's the next stop along the way when you're touring them. And at Sanananda, as I said, we've got this the original shoreline where the Japanese had landed in part, because you're near Basaboa, which is the original landing site when the Japanese came down on 21 July, which kicked off the Kokoda campaign, if you will. And we cross this creek. You can wade, it depends, it's tidal, because it's now a creek where the original shoreline was, where we land on the point at Sanananda. You cross this creek. It's murky and it's a bit slimy. It depends on when the tide comes down. And we usually punt on one of those banana boats. You punt across to get to the other side. But it's about up to your waist. And when you look down, though, if you punt around, you can see And it kind of, I mentioned this on the Milne Bay podcast. I mean, you can see the skeletal remains, if you will, of the Japanese Daihatsu landing barges. There's a couple of them there. So you can go over them and you wouldn't know they were there unless someone showed you, because you can just see the outline of them. And I usually show people pictures of what they were like the war. So that's from the war. So that's the first thing you see. And when you get onto the other side of the bank, there, unfortunately, he passed away, a guy named Ananias, and he was a wonderful chap, and he looked after a memorial there. And if you remember earlier, I spoke about that there's only two main official memorials out on the Australian ones anyway, out on the northern beaches, and they're at Gona and at Buna. But at Sanananda, in the 70s, I think it was, a man named Frank Budden, who was a member of the 55th, 53rd Battalion. He was an officer. He also wrote the history, the Mice of Moresby. He'd came up with some veterans, and I didn't meet him. He passed away before I started getting into the history. But I did meet a guy named Jack Stevens, who also has passed away, but he was there on that trip. And the story goes that Ananias came out and Frank Budden had this little plaque, only a tiny bronze plaque. It'd fit in the palm of your two hands put together, was placed there. And that was the only memorial for many, many years that represented what happened there. And for listeners, if you don't know, that battalion that I spoke about, the 55th, 53rd, they attacked towards Sanananda on the Sanananda Road. And their date in history is very easy to remember because it happened on the 7th of December, so a year after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And it was a huge devastation to that battalion. Remember, some of them had seen some fighting, but a lot of them weren't. This is their first battle. And the 55th, 53rd on the 7th of December, that Sydney battalion had run up against the Japanese, and in the space of a day, they'd had 180 casualties out of the battalion, either killed, missing, or wounded, and it just is extraordinary. So this little, so what we'll see there is there's a collection of stuff, because a lot of stuff you won't see so much on the track. You see more down here, and I'm saying small items like shells and, as I said, gas masks before, and helmets and things like that. But next to this memorial is a little hut, if you will. It has a table which is about up to just above your waist height, and the local people, when they tend to their gardens, that's when they find this stuff and they lay it all out. And it's a great opportunity to have a look at all this different stuff. You've got push bikes. You wouldn't know it unless you picked it up in your hand and you realise, hang on, what's that? A push bike. How did a push bike get here? What's it doing from the war? Well, of course, when the Japanese landed, they brought push bikes with them. Some of those have been captured at Singapore and come via Rabaul down there. So you've got these, you're not seeing the whole push bike, but you're seeing rusted parts of the handlebars and stuff like that. You've got pack saddle frames for saddles, for pack saddles, because the Japanese had brought down with them horses, and they had a lot of horses that would move their supplies from the beachheads up. So you're seeing a lot of this stuff. Recently, as in 2018, I had the pleasure to take descendants of the 55th, 53rd back. They kept the Frank Budden Memorial, but they had a rededication. The Australian High Commissioner and the head of the Army mission up there had came out, and we'd put in this plaque. So there's a little memorial garden there, and it has some plaques which have been put there by descendants and associations, which are really the only thing on the battlefield. But it is worth seeing, to think that, not only did veterans come back after war, but their immediate, sons and daughters came back. And it's a real treat. It's probably, to my mind, the most special part of any of the places that you can see in Papua, for that very reason, because people have made that pilgrimage, and it's a very personal memorial.
What other sites are there to see in Sanananda, David?
So at Sanananda, there is a road which would eventually take you all the way back to Popondetta, but it roughly follows or parallels in a lot of places the Sanananda track. And if you walk along it far enough, you can go up to a place called Huggins Roadblock, which was named after an American officer who had put in so you've got to imagine we're going the opposite way to what the Allies were coming. We're coming from the Japanese direction, but you can walk along this, what they call the Sanananda Road. In fact, some of the battle honours will have Sanananda Road on them, especially for the 55th, 53rd, for example. And we walk along, not everyone might want to do the walk, but it's on a flat, it is flat, but it is quite bumpy because in the not so recent past, we had the Americans came up there and laid down this base to give the people some break from because it's still a swampy area at the best of times, but they could get vehicles in there. So we, as I said, it parallels the road, and when you get up there, you can see a Wirraway. There is a wreck of an Australian railway that you see in a village. That's one of the first stops. There's also, which I find is remarkable, there is the remnants of, on the right-hand side going up that track, of the Japanese hospital. And I still remember the first time I was ever shown it. There was just, and they're still there. There's all these rice bowls with, and they're like enamel, blue and white enamel. And when you turn them over, they've got the anchor of the Japanese Navy on them. And there are still vials of morphine still in their glass. There is even, there must have been some sort of dental thing attached to the Japanese hospital, because there's these, false teeth. There is plenty of medical rusted out, what must have held bandages and things like that. And of course, there is still signal. There's still a lot of signal equipment, even the insulators and stuff. And it's quite a large area. And although it would have been obviously makeshift, there wouldn't have been buildings. It would have been tented and those sorts of things. But the equipment that the Japanese had there's this high concentration of this on this side of what is known as the Japanese hospital. And you could walk straight by it if you didn't know where it is, because obviously it's all overgrown. And moving on from there as we head towards Huggins Roadblock, again, you can go into, you sort of get off this new road and you get back on the Sanananda track proper, and you can pick up where the track is there. And there's wheels off horse and carts, Japanese. They must have had some sort of carts, and you can still find the iron that made up the wheels. And again, as I said about Hattie's village, there are big craters, and in fact the largest one I've ever seen, because you imagine this whole area, which was swampy, and the Japanese were hidden, well camouflaged, and the Allies attempted to bomb it. And on this part that we are now, there is a huge crater. It's the biggest one that I know of out there in the bush. There might be others, but this is huge. Like, you can actually still, slide down into it and walk around and look, and you realize this is the crater that's been made from a bomb, an aerial bombardment. And as you go up through there, you can you get back and you can see, where a roadway, where a track would have been, because even though it's overgrown, it's swampy, and it's still as miserable as what it was rather 80 years ago. And when you read the history, you talk of men. I mentioned a veteran before, Jack Stevens. He told me that he only ever once slept without his boots on, because they had a cause to stand to at night. There must have been some activity, and as he did, he'd had his boots off, and he'd stepped on a piece of kunai grass that had been cut down and cleared, and he said it was like a metal spike going into. He cut his foot, and you can still see that area, and the scrub typhoid, which a lot of soldiers complained of, that was one of the ailments that took a lot of soldiers off. That still is ever present. Obviously, we're only going to go in there for a moment. We're not going to live in it. But the mosquitoes and the swampy area, when you go off the Sanananda track, really brings you so close to what it would have been for an Australian or an American soldier 80 years ago.
Well, David, now let's talk about the last of the three sites we're going to visit, which is Buna, and tell us about what went on there and what you can see there today.
Yeah, indeed. So imagine we've done our walk and we've gone back to Sanananda, to the village where we've had a wonderful stay. And then the next day, what I usually do is we get back in the boat. So again, wonderful, way to get around. You can drive to all these points, but trust me, in the boat, it's actually a lot smoother, a lot quicker, and a lot more enjoyable. So we get out of Sanananda on the boat and we go up to Buna. And when you hit Buna Beach, there's quite a really nice, because you can imagine it, because it's volcanic sand, the water's quite murky. It's not that the water's not clean, it's just that the sand is dark. But at Buna, I always jump off the boat as it's pulling up. So this is literally these banana boats that reverse themselves onto sand. And when you get there at Buna, as I said, there's a nice swim. The first thing you see that other memorial cairn, the official memorial cairn, which was built, as I said, the original ones had been there immediately after the war, are now in Popondetta, which we would have seen. And there is a clinic. The first thing you see is a clinic. There is the wreckage of what I believe is a Japanese plane. There's also a wing of another plane standing up on its side that someone's propped up. So immediately when you get there, you realise, oh, okay, we certainly know that the war has been here. And there's also a big a memorial that the American Legion, so like the RSL, has placed there, which talks about the battles the Americans fought, because Buna is really a big thing for the Americans, and this is the area that they saw the most fighting in. And when you start to walk through the village of Buna, you get up to the centre of the town, if you will. And the one thing that sticks out is tracks. We spoke about tanks earlier, Bren gun tracks, because the Bren gun carriers were taken out, and the locals are using those like borders for their garden, because all the villages you see are beautifully maintained and very clean around people's huts. And you'll see these wonderful little gardens of flowers and that, which have been bordered by these tank tracks. And on the left-hand side, as you walk up through the centre of Buna, you see there's a lovely collection of things there. In fact, until recently, there was bones, believe it or not, in Bag. They believed that they were Japanese bones, because the Japanese did themselves come back and do a lot of work in that area to try and repatriate. Well, not repatriate, sorry, that's wrong. That to get the bones of their ancestors, they would actually cremate them on site, which is something that the Japanese culture does. And you, I remember the first time I walked up there. You won't see them that often now because that activity, but it wouldn't be unusual to see bones in these little, I call them museums, but you imagine they're a collection of things that the local people have dug up. Some of the interesting stuff that you would see, pardon me, in Buna is, I remember picking up a Japanese helmet, still there with the anchor because the star was for the army, but the Special Naval Landing Force, these are the guys that opened up the beachhead. That's pretty amazing. And seeing even toothbrush, you've got shaving, you've got American cutlery, you've got cups, canteens that the Americans had, which are very similar to what the modern Australian Army has. The water bottle fits in them, all that stuff's there. And as we move along from Buna, I get people to use their imagination, because it was in that spot that famous George Silk photograph of the Australian soldier and the Papuan coming down, marching along. I'm sure people in their mind can conjure up that image. You're actually standing pretty much on that spot where that photo was taken. And as we move up along through Buna, there is some more plane wreckages, but importantly, it's all covered in kunai. You go past the school, there's some engines of planes, and there's some more depressions where aerial bombardment is. But then we cut out into the kunai grass. And I must say, Matt, the one thing that comes to my mind, if the the listener could conjure up in their mind, is that sound of the kunai grass waving in the wind. It just makes this distinct noise. And as we cross the kunai, you can start to see where the ground is fairly level, and that's where the Japanese had an airstrip. And there is a gun still in its original place. This is a naval gun that the Japanese had put there to protect their airfield when they set an airfield up there at the start of the campaign. And the gun and the box where the ammunition is still in its original spot, which is quite amazing. But I must say, man, that's that part of Buna. But as we come back through Buna and we walk past the where our boat is pulled up on the beach, we take another little side tour. And this is one of the most amazing things that you will see. And that is that there is an area, there's probably more of them still out there covered in scrub, but this is an area where you can actually view one of those diamond formations of Japanese bunkers. Now, one of them is in particularly good order. Obviously, the coconut palms have long rotted away and the corrugated iron has rusted and that, but the 44-gallon drums are still in their original spot where they made these bunkers out of that I mentioned earlier. And you can see, you stand in the village, if somebody lives there, you stand in one of the yards of one of the people who lived in Buna, and you can look and you can see the diamond formation of these bunkers, and you realise when you're in the centre of them how hard they would have been as the soldiers had to attack, the Allies had to attack, really with rifle, grenade and makeshift weapon systems to blow these bunkers open, how hard it would have been and how ingenious the Japanese, I guess, had built these bunkers, again, above the ground in diamond formation where they all mutually supported one another. It's just amazing to think that they are still in place and they were made out of makeshift materials like the 44-gallon drums. They're still there 80 years on. It's, I mean, they're probably not going to be there forever, but if you get the chance, you have to go and see how the Japanese defended this position.
Just extraordinary, David. It's an extraordinary area, and I'm really glad we get to walk the ground in this virtual sense to bring it to more people's attention. And I know it's not going to be a destination that people are going to rush out and visit like they will with Gallipoli or France, or if you're in the UK heading over to the Somme or up to the Ypres Salient. I know it's not quite the same, but if you are going to do a trip to New Guinea, if you are going to do the Kokoda track, then absolutely you should be including the beachheads as well, because just a vital part of the story, and one that we just overlook too much. It sounds like it's a place that has a special place in your heart, David.
It does, and for two reasons. One, because, as we said earlier, it doesn't get the same attention that it does, and I have met more veterans, I guess, well, more units served there for a start, but I met more veterans that fought at the beachheads than I have on Kokoda. I mean, I've met a lot of them, but in particular, especially that cohort of the 55th, 53rd, I worked with them at Concord, taking children around the walkway, and I heard their stories. So that holds a special place for me. But the second thing is that the hospitality that you get, like when you walk Kokoda, you get the hospitality, but you're moving through the villages. When we visit the beachheads, you're actually staying for an extended period. You'll do a couple of nights in the village, and you get the hospitality of these people, and you'll hear the stories that have been passed down from then, what it would have been like when their fathers and grandfathers had to leave and abandon their villages. And you get that sense of it's still relevant. It still affects people's lives to these days. And it is, for my mind, one of the if you are going to go to New Guinea, you have to go to the northern beachheads. As I said, 1,600 Australians, or 1,261 was the figure actually of killed, over 2,000 wounded. 734 Americans were killed there. 2,000 of them were wounded. And between the Kokoda campaign and the northern beachheads, an estimated 14,000 Japanese casualties. So it's an extraordinary numbers, extraordinary battles. And, it goes all the way from July of 42 until January of 43. So it should be more in the collective minds of Australians to pay a visit and a pilgrimage to the young Australians that lost their lives fighting for Australia.
Very well said, David. And I look forward to, in the very near future, getting over there with you and walking that ground. It'll be a rare privilege. But thank you very much for your time, David. And if you're listening to this, let us know what you think. Have you got any plans to visit the battlefields of New Guinea? Don't forget you can do so with our company, with Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours. And David personally leads some of those tours, and the rest of his team do a great job leading our tours of New Guinea. But certainly jump on the socials and tell us.
1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps to build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Every year, over 300 businesses start right here in Prince William County.
And I'm one of them. I'm Stefano Marzano with Mighty Meals. We deliver healthy, locally sourced, chef-prepared meals right to our customers' doors. The support we received from Prince William County has been instrumental to our growth and expansion into our new commercial kitchen in Gainesville.
Go to pwcstartups.com to learn how our economic development team can help your business. That's pwcstartups.com.
That's what you think about these battles of the beachheads. You can find us on Twitter. Look for me at Matt McLachlan on Twitter. Look for us on Facebook, either at Matt McLachlan Battlefield Tours or Living History. Don't forget my book. If you're interested in World War II history, my book on the Cowra Breakout is out now, and you can order that online. But just follow us on socials to hear all about everything we're doing, particularly with this World War II history, because it's a significant chapter, and we're enjoying some great anniversaries at the moment commemorating these battles. David Howell, as always, a real pleasure. Thank you for joining us on BattleWalks.
Thanks for having me, Matt.